Hello, and you're all very welcome to this webinar with myself and Adrian, an introduction to servant leadership. Um, I guess the aim of this webinar really is to help us disseminate servant leadership out there into the wider, I suppose, wider practice realm, and I suppose build a little bit of awareness of it. And we do appreciate you all taking the time out to log on. If you're anything like myself, working all day in front of a computer and then logging on again that night, it can be a little bit taxing. So we do appreciate all of you who have taken the time out of your day. So we've structured it a little bit whereby any questions that you guys have, we can take at the end of the presentations. Both myself and Adrian will be speaking at different points. So any questions that you have, we will take them at the end. But if there is anything burning or glaring that we missed, if you want to go into the chat and maybe post that question there, and we can follow up on that. So servant leadership, what is it? And I guess it's quite an abstract concept, and really underlies the importance of actually unpacking it a little bit. And you may see there, I have down an evidence-based leadership approach. And I guess this is something that both myself and Adrian want to impress upon people. When we hear the idea of servant leadership at first, it has a lot of, I suppose, social and cultural connotations. And people may make assumptions about it that really may not be necessarily accurate or based on the theory or what the evidence suggests about it. So we wanted to really impress that it is an evidence-based approach to leadership, and we will look at why that is the case in a little bit further along the webinar. Okay, so welcome. And for those of you who are Irish, at least you'll know Mrs. Doyle. So the introductions, myself and Adrian will briefly kind of introduce ourselves, our background, and our relationship with servant leadership. Then we'll provide I suppose, a bit of an overview and start to unpack what is often a very, very abstract idea, and really distill some of the important practices and way of being related to servant leadership. We'll then discuss a little bit about the type of training, and as well as us discussing that, we would also like to get some of your own ideas, because as well as both myself and Adrian talking about servant leadership and where we're coming from with it and where we are going with it, we'd also like to really take on opinions of potential participants as to the how it can be delivered, particularly in our current climate. And then we'll open I was going to say open the floor up, but we're online, so we'll open the online chats up to any questions that you may have about servant leadership, or indeed the training that we are offering and are going to be offering going forward. So I'm going to hand you over now to Adrian, who I am absolutely delighted has come on board to partner with me in delivering this training. He is going to add immense value to it. And it can only be a good thing and add a lot of value to the training. So, Adrian, hello.
Thanks, Daryl. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? I know some of some we've met before. I'm delighted to be on board with servant leadership training, something that I believe passionately in. In 2014, our CEO of the organisation I work with, Crosscare, came to us with this idea of this training that he presented as servant leadership. The way that he decided to train the organisation was not to just train what would ordinarily be described as the leaders in the organisation, because the concept of servant leadership takes it beyond what would ordinarily be described as leaders. So the senior management team trained the management team then trained the next level, trained the next level, trained the next level, trained the next level. And over a period of years, we trained the whole organisation. Because servant leadership says that everyone within their own life and work experience can be the leader. using servant leadership, you want to help them grow and develop, and you want to help them become the absolute best leader in that position. So that's what the training, that's where the inspiration for my career, for the rest of it from 2014 came from. This idea that each and every one of us could be the best leader that we could be. Not the best manager or deputy manager or CEO, but the best leader that we could be in our individual role. And we try to infuse it into everything that we do. So, you know, if you're, for example, as I am one of the supervisors, then, you know, part of, not just part of, but the greatest part of the supervision process for me is looking for the lesser strengths within the individuals and building on them. Not looking for where the mistakes are being made, not looking for, you know, when someone tripped up and didn't do the best job, but looking for where's the lesser strength and what do we need to do to help that person grow and develop. Because, you know, when you take a purely negative approach to a leadership or leadership style, and when you take the heart out of leadership, and when you don't see it as your job to serve first, then you're going to lose that person. You're going to lose the relationship. You're going to lose the ability to coach them and to guide them, and the connectedness that comes back. That's one of the beauties of servant leadership. Early on in my servant leadership career, then Daryl came in to do his thesis study, which he'll talk about. And me and Daryl sat down and we had a long interview officially, but a long chat around servant leadership, and that's how I met Daryl first.
We first, I suppose, met when I was doing my master's thesis on how Crosscare actually went about implementing servant leadership, and that was the first time I got to sit down with Adrian and really unpack this. And it's been a journey, I suppose, since then for me. Al Rogers in particularly, he talks about person-centered therapy as being a way of being, and really that's what servant leadership is as well. It's a lifelong commitment to a leadership approach. However, and by no means, it is not some type of fluffy type of leadership approach that can only be used in care and professions. This is a leadership approach that's used across the board in diverse settings, in diverse organizations, and by diverse people. And we're going to really unpack that a little bit more on the next few slides. And Adrian's going to take you through the next one.
Okay, so the need for ethical leadership. And one of the things that all through my social care career, but through my personal life as well, that really grates with me is unethical leadership. And we're seeing it every day of the week. You know, none more so than if you look to the USA and see the way that the leadership is being conducted in that country at the moment, and in our own country as well. You know, down the years, I've had the good fortune to work for great leaders and the misfortune to work for not so great leaders. And every day of the week, when you go home from your day's work, whether you be in social care or whether you be in business or wherever sector you're working in, you know, if you can go home and say that, you know, I was ethically challenged today, but I stood firm. What you're left with then is your integrity. And for us, integrity is so important, especially when you're working with vulnerable people. Unethical decisions made by those in power across the private, public, and charitable sectors are what will kill each of those sectors. They're so dangerous because you can never stand over them. You completely lost the argument. Once you breach that ethical standard, the ethical standard that you set for yourself, you've lost the argument. The financial and societal impacts, if you look at some of the decision making that's been made down the years in relation to, I'm trying to think of something that's topical, but if we look at some of the stuff around the mother and baby homes, and you know, that's been in the news recently, with Minister O'Gorman, etc., etc. You know, straight away, there's a brand new minister who made a decision that's, you know, bordering on unethical, but the societal impact was huge. All of those women and now adults who were born in all of those institutions were re-traumatized by what happened there. And a little bit of thought into that process, the implications could have been much lessened. You know, and this is where we really need to think seriously about societal impacts, the financial impacts. If you, another great example of an unethical decision in relation to the financial impacts. If you look at the whole NAMA process, we know there's the reports just come out this week into some of that stuff. Those most marginalised often bear the brunt. They're two examples of very marginalised, very traumatised people, and traumatised and marginalised for different reasons. But they were the ones who significantly bore the brunt of that. Employees in a lot of organizations are purely seen as cogs in the wheel. They're just something that keeps the whole machine rolling over. You know, you have X amount of people on that line packing boxes, and you have X amount of people there, and one of them people drop out, should we just put another one in? Whereas with a servant leadership approach, because you work really strongly on the interrelationships right across the domain of the service or right across the domain of the business, it's not cogs in the wheel anymore. It's not just someone that's replaceable, but it's my colleague and my peer. You start to evaluate things differently and you start to make decisions differently. So instead of piling on the shifts on someone just because they'll do it, you look at, okay, how many hours have they worked this week? I'm not going to ask them to work 24 hours in a row. That's something unfair. I'll try and bring in someone from relief to do that. So again, the head looks at it, but then the heart looks at it. And poor leadership, or the all about me leadership, the leader who thinks that leadership is all about him is the one who's failing to see what leadership is about. You know, the leadership that I try and work to is how good and how looked after are all of the people around me. Because if they are cared for and supported and loved and interconnected and helped develop and grow, well then makes all of my decisions much easier, because they inform me all the time about what's going to keep our side of the sector ticking over and going well. They are then individually great leaders in all of the positions they're in.
Thanks, Adrian. And I guess then just to follow that up with, well, who and what types of services would embrace servant leadership? And it really doesn't matter what type of organization you are, because servant leadership is a general concept that can be used anywhere. It's not just for services that may have a charitable or a public service at their heart or their mission. Indeed, some of the top Fortune 500 companies, these would be the big companies in America, really rich countries, companies, well-run companies, within the billions of dollars. So some of these companies are servant-led organizations. Some of them that are coming to mind at the moment would be Southwest Airlines. I believe Starbucks has also recently taken on a servant leadership approach. Among others, there's lots of different private for-profit companies that are servant leadership ran. So across the public bodies, private bodies, and charitable organizations. So it's a whole host of different types of services, those with a business orientation, but also those with more charitable purposes. And it doesn't really matter when one type of sector is no better than another when it comes to this. This is really going back to what Adrian was speaking about a moment ago. This is about how you treat people. Servant leadership happens within the interpersonal relationship. So it's that one-to-one, getting to know people, getting to know what they need, getting to know how you can support them. And not just employees, all the stakeholders within the company or the communities within that companies are situated. You may be familiar with the concept of corporate responsibility, i.e. those big corporations, organizations have an ethical duty to I suppose, engage with the communities that they're embedded in and to look after those communities to a certain extent. So individuals who want to have better organizations, better communities and society. So if we look maybe at some of the historical figures in society that aren't really connected to organizations as such, and they are probably more part of movements, we will see that there have been several servant leaders within that domain throughout society, throughout history. And Adrian will probably tip a little bit on those in the next few slides. So it's a transpositional leadership approach. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that your position does not make you a leader. First of all, you may have the title of a CEO, a senior manager, or indeed some type of minister or Taoiseach. Those positions don't give you legitimacy. How you treat and interact with those who you are leading is where your legitimacy as a leader comes from. So transpositional leadership is really that anybody can be a leader, be you a frontline staff, be you someone who is working in a shop, in a restaurant, etc. It doesn't really matter about your position as such. We all have leadership potential, and servant leadership aims to leverage that potential and bring the best out in all of us and all those around us. Why? Well, because it works. It's an evidence-based approach. It has a mountain of research now behind it, which we will tip on a little bit later. And it is something that really want to impress on you. It's an evidence-based approach, and it has outcomes across many, many different criteria, be that team, individual, and organization. We often talk about employee engagement, how employees feel about their organizations, and servant-led organizations. The employees in these organizations generally have very, very positive experiences of those organizations, and really go on, and the organization means more to them than probably some other organizations where there's bad leadership being displayed. So they'll have a sense of energy about the organization, they'll have a positive view of the organization, and they'll give of themselves as opposed to just turning up, going in, signing on the dotted line and waiting for the paycheck to come along once a week or once a month, however you're being paid. So there's that connection to the organization as a sense of community, and that speaks to, I suppose, the nature of the relationships that servant leaders build with employees and all those that they come in contact with.
Like the first statement there, servant leadership is a timeless concept going back further than the time of Jesus Christ. When we were starting our servant leadership training, and this was one of the conversations that we had that kind of had sticking points for some people. You know, Crosscare is the social care wing of the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese, Dublin Archdiocese, and we talk about, you know, it's kind of in the image and likeness of God or of Jesus, and people kind of get their knickers in the knot a little bit about, you know, we can't kind of make it all Catholic and all of that sort of stuff. And during our training, during my servant leadership training, one of the trainers asked, no matter what your beliefs are, you know, whether you're agnostic or, you know, whether you're a Catholic or a Muslim or the Sikh or the Sikh or something else, you know, whatever your belief is, do you have an understanding of the man Jesus Christ? Do you have an understanding of what the stories say about him? And nearly everyone in the room did. And within that understanding of the stories of the man Jesus Christ is the embedded servant leadership. You know, a man, as the stories tell us, who went out to do no wrong, wanted to develop and grow those around him, and wanted everyone around him to have better outcomes. And that's kind of the essence of it. As a term, it was first coined by Robert Greenleaf, who worked for one of the big electric companies. He wrote an essay, I think it was back in 1932, I think it was, which you can get. It's online there. You can pick it up handy enough. And you know, if you in reading the essay now, some of the language is a little bit archaic, But he really caught what what the servant leadership was. He tells there's some great stories from Greenleaf himself, but one of the great ones that I particularly liked was um, there was a famous an American basketball coach who was a servant leader trained as well. This gone back into the 60s, I think, and they signed one of the young basketball stars. You know the way they do this what they call the draft every year, and they signed this young kid from one of the big basketball colleges into the professional leagues, and all of the professional team's gear is sponsored. You know, so you wear what you're told to wear. And on the first night that this young guy was playing, the coach went to him and says, I'd like to lace your boots, your basketball boots." And the young kid, 18 years of age, 17 years of age, laughed at him and said, "No, I could lace my own shoes." And he said, "Well, look, there's a certain way that we like to have it done, and I'd like to do that for you." And the young kid refused again. And by halftime, he had blisters all around his ankles, and all his colleagues were looking at him, kind of smiling and going, you know, "Our leader tried to serve you and you denied it." I can't remember the name of the coach. It might have been Coach Carter, but I can't remember. Servant and leader, a contradiction, an oxymoron, a paradox. Can you serve and lead? And I suppose, uh, as a concept, when we look at it, the leadership models that we've grown up with, um, if any of you out there, listening to us tonight are in leadership, where did leadership role come from? Was there a specific type of training that you've done, or did you just learn your leadership role off the person who was leading in your organization at the time that you were ready to move on up? And if that's the case, then is the type of leadership that you are now using, is it or what type of leadership is it? Do you have a fundamental understanding of it? And then the servant piece, can you just serve people? And when we see servitude, or when we look at and understand servitude, it has so many negative connotations. Going back into Black African history. So you've two things there that there's a massive power divide: the servant and the leader. Can you be both? But absolutely, you can. There's in the next bit of the slide here, you see Greenleaf's think came in the 60s when he read Herman Hesse's short novel Journey, the account of a mythical journey by a group of people on a spiritual quest. And that story is brilliant. It's in essence, if I can remember some of it, it's about a group of people who are going to travel to a city far away to have a meeting. I think it was a king, or a very noble man. And on the way, they had a guide, a servant, to look after them. So and as they're journeying to the east, they're stopping off in different villages and cities to pick up the leaders in each one. And this little servant is running after them and feeding them and cooking for them, and horses are okay, and he's doing everything. And of course, they're treating him like an absolute lackey. And when they get to the last village before they get to the main city to go and meet the king, they wake up the next morning. They've had their dinner, they've had their sleep, and they wake up the next morning to travel on to the main city, and the servant is gone. And they're really struggling to pack up and get themselves sorted. And by the time they get to the city, they're absolutely exhausted and fighting with each other and stressed and all the rest of it. And when they get brought into the city and they get they're settled into their quarters and they're brought to meet the king was the servant. He was the one that had went out to meet them and brought them on their journey all the way to the point of a few miles from the gates. It's a really beautiful story, and a real interesting way of accounting the journey of the servant and the leader. Servant leadership, what is it? It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then the conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant, first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. And that's the most important thing. You know, no matter whether you are in the business world, the high finance world, social care, it doesn't matter, because none of it can be successful without the people who are operating within that world. So, you know, if you're in the business world and you have front-facing staff and you have sales staff and you have, you know, your account staff and you have all of that sort of stuff, if you don't have positive growth-centered development relationships, really congruent relationships with those individuals, they're going to work for their euro. They're not going to work for you. They're going to work Monday to Friday. They're going to walk out there and they're not going to care. You know, we all know that. I think one of the lessons I learned down the years was, you know, everything is scary in relation to, you know, the first time I as an example, the first time I met someone who was addicted to heroin. You know, up to that point, I had this idea of what someone who was addicted to heroin would be like. But then I met this person in a setting whereby I was part of the support package for that person now. So now I had to get to know them as an individual. And in that interrelationship then, I started to see the human being and not the addiction or the drug or the crime or the court cases or the medicalization, or I saw the human being. And that's the beauty of servant leadership. It focuses you down into the interrelationships. It really makes you look at yourself first. Really dig down to what's going on inside of you. You can still be a very practical manager or CEO or deputy or whatever role, because they're only roles. And then within roles, then we have tasks. You can still be all of those things. But to be a true servant leader, you have to, first of all, really understand what's going on for yourself. And then when you understand what's going on for yourself and you interrelate with people at that level, then that changes the dynamic. You know, so when you look at, say, as an example in Ireland, you know, the war on drugs, and we're looking at it from a judicial and medical perspective. Well, if we flip that on its head and looked at it purely from a heart level, social care type perspective, I wonder what sort of results we might get then. The best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit, or at least not be further deprived? Now, that's what Robert Greenleaf said. That's what he posited in 1976. So, as a management learning servant leadership, why would that not be where you would strive to take yourself, your team, and your organization? Do those served grow as persons? That's not saying, do those that use our services grow as persons? That's saying, everyone that you come into contact with, do they grow as persons? Do they, while being served, so while you as a servant leader, Do they become healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous? You know, one of the things I say to the guys that I supervise when I first meet them and we sign a supervision contract and all, my expectation is that um, that they're able to pull me up as well, that they can challenge my work, they can challenge the way that I supervise them, and by saying that to them, I then explicitly tell them that they have my permission to do that, and by giving that permission, then I'm explicitly telling them that if I am challenged and if they pull me up, this is the way I'll deal with it. That I'll deal with it from from a learning perspective, that I'll deal with it with care, with no judgment, and that I will try and help them and myself learn from that. And that's the priority of servant leadership. What is the effect on the least privileged in society, and will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So when we're working as servant leaders in the type of services that I've worked in all my life, well, for the last 20 years, will the individuals that come and meet with me on a daily basis benefit in any way? And you know, that's about adjusting your baseline as well. And as a servant leader, you know, you become hyper aware then of what your impact can be. You don't, you begin to realize that you can't save the world. Sometimes you can't save yourself. But will someone benefit, or at least not be further deprived? It's quite a simple concept, isn't it, really, when you think about it? But if you speak to anyone who's been in services and through service, and we're very lucky in the organisation I work with, a lot of my colleagues, an awful lot of my colleagues have been through services, and to a person, they will tell you that the most important thing for them in all of the different services they've used, whether it's been addiction services, whether it's been medical services, whether it has been education services, whether they've lived in residential care, it doesn't matter. Prison, it doesn't matter. The most important thing was the relationships they had with the professionals that worked with them. That was and that's the essence of servant leadership, is understanding yourself and understanding exactly how it affects you and the impact that you can have on others. At its core, servant leadership is a long-term transformational approach to life and work. In essence, it's a way of being that has the potential for creating positive change throughout our society. You know, so if we adopt this, in an organisation like Crosscare, and you train 300, 400, or 500 people, then you suddenly see a cultural shift. It doesn't mean that everyone gets servant leadership in Crosscare. Some don't. But if enough people get it, then you get a shift in a culture. And that's how servant leadership can change society. It's about that cultural shift. A servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. While traditional leadership generally involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid, servant leadership is different. The servant leader shares the power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. And what we would say during our training initially, and there's different models of this, but you're all aware of the power pyramid, you know, where you've the CEO or a version of the senior leader sitting on top, and then as you go down the power pyramid, then you have all the layers, you know, the managers and the deputies and the team leaders, or whatever way. But that's the way. It's one on top of the other, 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 and we all understand that, and we see it in action every day of the week. You know, some great examples in the human services type of fields will be the medical model is very much like that. You know, where you have the consultants at the top and you have the cleaners or the patients at the bottom. And what we were asked to look at when we were training initially, and as I said, there's different concepts of this, was to take that model like that, draw a line down the middle of it like that, and then turn the whole on its side. So you still have the CEO at the pointy end, and you still have all of the layers down, but we're all sitting on the same plane. We're all sitting on the same line. So as I said to you very early on in this, when we look at it, it means then that the CEO's job is to become the best servant leader CEO he can or she can. The same with the managers, the same with the deputies, the same with the key workers, the same with the healthcare assistants, the same with the maintenance crew, the same with the cleaners. Everyone becomes the expert leader in their field. They use their head and they use their heart. So it puts the needs of others first and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. The maintenance crew that work with me in Crosscare, the guy that works out with us most of the time in Dunleary, he came from Ciscs, which is one of the biggest building, or was one of the biggest building companies in the country. And he was a senior foreman with Ciscs, and now he's a maintenance man with Crosscare. The wages difference is massive. But ask him where he'd prefer to be. He bounces into our building. He comes out to work with us on the Thursday and Friday, and he bounces into our building as happy as Larry. He's servant leader trained as well, and he operates to a massively high standard. You want to see him working in our building when all the clients are about and the way he treats them. Phenomenal to watch. So, servant leader shares the power and puts the needs of others first and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible.
A little bit about, I guess, where we started with this and what we're bringing to the training, both in the practical sense and probably in a theoretical sense as well. So Adrian spoke lovely about the practical examples of his experience of servant leadership and how he goes about displaying that on a day-to-day basis, both how he lives his life and indeed how he works in his organization. We spoke about at the start, I suppose, and you can see in the middle of the screen, the front copy of the research thesis that I done about 5 years ago now, it probably was. And that looked at, as I spoke about already, how Crosscare went about implementing servant leadership. So it wasn't a discussion of the theories as such, but it was more so a discussion at the structural level. So how those guys went about doing that, the training, the cultural shifts, the procedures, the processes, the challenges, the difficulties, the wins, the successes. So it unpacked all that and looked at it, I suppose, the cultural change or the cultural change that was happening at that point in time. I came in probably, those guys were probably about 2 years or so into training their staff. So I think they had like two or 300
That's right.
staff. Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, but about 2 years into it, they probably had half of the 50% of the staff trained at that time. And it was a cascading model, as Adrian spoke about. So I kind of captured what was going on for people at that point in time, the different experiences from the CEO and the senior management to managers, to Adrian, and to some of the frontline practitioners as well. So I tried to sample a variety of people within that to have a look at their experiences as well in different types of services, homelessness services and the youth work service. So that's really where the research for me began. That was the first major piece of research on it. From that, then we can go to the right hand corner of the screen where I published a paper in the International Leadership Journal. Some of you may have a copy of that. I know for the guys who signed up before the webinar advertisement, when they signed up, a copy of that was sent to them. But a copy is available for anybody that wants one, both online, but it also comes with the training as well. And what that research done, I really unpacked the pertinent practices, and that's the title of the paper. So Servant Leadership, a timely extraction of pertinent practices. And what the servant leadership research tells us is that there's a lot to the servant leadership research. First of all, there's so many different models out there, but we've come now beyond the model. So there's a number of different meta-analysis. So that would really be the gold standard for making decisions, policy decisions, practical decisions, theoretical decisions, and training decisions. But you'd be looking to base that on meta-analysis. So meta-analysis brings lots of different studies together that are of a similar nature or homogeneous and pulls them together. And I'm not going to get into talking about that too much, but it's really the gold standard for evidence. And what that research is telling us is that servant leadership is the real deal, basically, to put it bluntly. And I unpick there some of the important practices, and I do that through a conceptual paper. It is a bit theoretical, there's a bit of a literature review, but it's conceptual, and that's really what the training is based on, as well as the research that came previous to thesis, and of course the practice. And that's really a key point here, and something that Adrian brings much more than me, in a practical sense, is that experience of I suppose day-to-day servant leadership, but also what was happening within the organization, and having that lived experience of going through a whole training regime of a very big almost national organization that has many hundreds of staff and many different projects spotted around Dublin, Wicklow, etc. And then to the left is a paper that has just been sent back with some edits done to it. And that's really, I unpack servant leadership for the health and social care sectors. So there's a couple of different papers there. There's research behind it. And there's a lot of practice and experience behind it as well. So it's something that's quite solid. It's rigorous. I wouldn't, I know Adrian wouldn't be standing behind it or putting our names to it if it wasn't something that was worthwhile, and that was rewarding, and that really does what it says on the tin. So that's a little bit about the research and the practice behind it. I don't want to get caught up too much in that. There is copies of that there for anyone who should want it. Okay, so the training itself, we're not going to break it down and unpick the practical parts of it. It goes way beyond what we can do on this webinar, but there's generally 4 modules, if you will, that we will be training people in. So what we do at the start is really an introduction to leadership theories. And that's unpacking, I suppose, historically the different types of leadership models that were out there. And we then, I suppose, situate servant leadership against that, compare it, contrast it, and look at it within those, under that lens. Then we move on to looking at some of the servant leadership models, which I mentioned there are lots of, but we don't get into that too much. This is where we will unpack the characteristics of this servant leadership training that people will be receiving. So it's broadly based on 7 characteristics that are either practical skill-based characteristics or more so behaviors or attributes that a servant leader will engage in. That's then backed up by 6 key ideas distilled from meta-analysis that tell us that this is really the essence of servant leadership, regardless of the characteristics, because some of the characteristics are probably general and can be applied to other general leadership ideas. So it's while we're giving you these 7 characteristics for skills base, it's really the 6 key ideas that come behind that through the meta-analysis that tell us that this is the essence or way of being of a servant leadership. So that's really the servant leadership training bunged in together. Then we look at the application of that and how you would go about actually practicing those ideas, attitudes, and ways of being within your interactions with people in your organizations, be that employees and those you work with, or indeed it doesn't have to actually be an organization per se. It could be a social club, a football team, a Gaelic team. You could be a member of some type of movement, social movements. If you go right back and look at some of the best servant leaders that we can actually talk about, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, all these people that had heart, they had their why. So why it is they're doing what they're doing. And that's really something that we're actually going to be looking at as well, helping you to develop your why. But servant leaders, it's, as I said, and I'll bring it back to being not, it's not about a position, it's not about a title that you have, it's about what you do, how you do it, and how you treat other people. So that's really at the heart of what it is we're trying to, I suppose, get you guys to actually start looking at leadership in those respects. Adrian spoke a little bit about I suppose, looking at yourself. So this is really, really important. We will be looking at you guys as leaders before we will be teaching you leadership skills. So it's about you. And that's the Servant Leadership Development Plan. And what we will be doing there is, it's a personal development piece, I suppose. It's not counseling. It's none of that. It's looking at you and starting to build your capacity as a leader. And we do that in a number of ways. We'll help you develop your why. We will look at your leadership mindset. We will look at your abilities to reflect, how you are as a reflective practitioner. We will look at your rationale, power rationale, how you use power. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. We all have a power need. It's just how we go about using that power need. Do we use it in a good way, or do we use it in a more corrosive way? So it's about looking at your motivational drives. And so we have a little workbook there, and we'll be looking at different assessments and bringing that all in together. And really what that is going to do is to give, first of all, it's going to help build your awareness. Awareness is integral for a servant leader. You need to be aware about yourself, how you are within your interpersonal relationships, and how you display leadership. And the workbook then will be looking at how these different domains interact with each other, and giving you really a lifelong development plan as such, that you can actually draw on and really benchmark yourself against, not other people, but yourself and your own development in your future leadership development. So that is the 4 core modules that you will be engaging in the servant leadership training. There's also other activities. There's going to be research articles, different articles, different activities, different videos, and all the stuff that come with a general good, robust type of training. And the first one is online pre-recorded, which is something I done a few months ago. So it would actually be me. Adrian wasn't part of that, but we could obviously re-record some of the presentations with both of us doing it. But as it stands, that's there, and that's on a learning management systems where you'd kind of engage in different activities, much like if those of you who have been university anytime recently, it'd be like Moodle. And then we have online Zoom classes, which be pretty much doing this. Live in person, as I said, that would be down the road. But then the other option is Zoom, on live online Zoom, but with also access to the learning management system. And then we have also, I suppose, if there's anyone here from organization or representing an organization or in a management position who would be considering or thinking about bringing servant leadership whole scale, much like Crosscare did, into the organization, we also then will be able to work with you guys around implementation plans. And that's about how to embed it into the culture, how to get all the processes and procedures in place, as well as the training. And of course, it's also really important to mention is that servant leadership doesn't mean that there's not policy and not good governance in an organization. Your staff or you go on training for a couple of days, you may do a course, that's fine. You come back to the organization, and even with the best of intentions, even with supervision and the training, things get lost. So really, when you're talking about kind of implementing something at the organizational level, you're talking about cultural change. You're talking about change management concepts, and that's what we draw on as well. We also draw on the implementation science literature that talks about implementing evidence-based practices and some of the pitfalls that come along with that. Again, many change management exercise actually fail before they even get off, and that's nothing to do with servant leadership. It's just that in general, regardless of what it is you're trying to change. So this is another level or dimension that myself and Adrian can bring to this, that helps embed practices at the organization level. Okay, details. So further details. Again, guys, I'm going to just have a little poll on this. So we are looking at a number of different options. So first of all, just to say, we will be running this starting January the 30th. It is a Saturday. We will do January the 30th, February the 6th, and February the 13th. So that's going to be the first live run of servant leadership that myself and Adrian are going to be doing. That's next month in the new year. Okay, so what we would really, it's 3 days in duration, and I think the added the break for a week will operate in a number of ways. And I think myself and Adrian spoke about this, and we feel that it's a good idea to have that break of maybe a week, whereby you can kind of reflect on the previous week's learning any new ideas or practices you can maybe even try and bring into your working life and come back and speak about that. So it does give that opportunity for integration. And there is, I suppose, a lot of different practical exercises that we will be asking learners to engage in. So it gives that space as well for reflection. Is any questions, please do feel free to jump on the mic. If you're not comfortable getting on the mic, you can, of course, put your questions in the chat